the boy science couldn't explain first appeared in dusty medical journals, a curious case that defied everything Victorian doctors thought they knew about the human body. Timothy Caldwell's unexplainable abilities shocked even the most skeptical minds of 1867, leaving science scrambling for answers that simply didn't exist. The phenomenon would change our understanding of human potential forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The heat of June 1866 hung like a wet blanket over Sedalia, Missouri. Even the night brought no relief, with air so thick it seemed to cling to the skin. It was just past midnight when a piercing cry shattered the stillness, rising from the direction of the Johnson family barn and echoing across the moonlit fields. Mary Johnson bolted upright in her bed, her nightgown damp with sweat. The scream came again, not human but not quite animal either. She fumbled for her shawl and rushed to the hallway, nearly colliding with her brother. "Robert, did you hear that?" Mary whispered, clutching her brother's arm. Robert Johnson nodded grimly, already pulling on his boots. "Wake Sarah. I'll fetch the lantern." Within minutes, doors slammed throughout the neighboring properties as the unsettling sound drew the curious and the concerned from their beds. Oil lamps bobbed like fireflies across the darkened landscape as neighbors converged on the Johnson farm. Mary and Robert reached the orchard first, lantern light casting long shadows among the apple trees. What they discovered stopped them cold. A neat row of chickens lay sprawled in the dirt, their bodies unmarked yet unmistakably lifeless, arranged with an eerie precision that suggested purpose rather than predator. "Lord have mercy," whispered Mary, crossing herself. "What could have done this?" Robert knelt beside the nearest bird, his weathered hands gentle as he turned it over. No blood, no wounds. It's as if they just stopped. As the neighbors gathered, their faces ghoulish in the flickering light, theories flew like startled birds. Some blamed wolves, others whispered of poison, and the oldest among them muttered darkly about omens and judgment. By dawn, word had spread through all of Sedalia. The war might have ended the previous year, but this new mystery awakened fresh anxieties in a community already raw with loss and change. It was Sarah Johnson who first noticed her nephew standing at the orchard's edge. Michael Johnson, barely 10 years old and orphaned by the war, watched the proceedings with unnervingly steady eyes. The boy's small fingers clutched a smooth, oval stone, turning it over and over in his palm. "I found it by the creek this morning," he said when Sarah asked about the stone, his voice oddly flat. "It was waiting for me." Something in his tone made Sarah shiver despite the growing heat of the day. She placed a protective hand on his thin shoulder, but Michael continued staring at the dead chickens. His expression neither frightened nor surprised, merely curious, as if observing an experiment with results exactly as anticipated. As the sun climbed higher, fear curled around every doorstep in Sedalia, a community suddenly aware that something inexplicable had taken root in their midst. The eerie stillness that followed the chicken deaths hung over the Johnson farm like an invisible shroud. A peculiar cold breeze whispered through the property despite the summer heat, making the corn stalks shiver as if in fear. The locals of Sedalia had never experienced anything quite like it, a chill that seemed to silence even the most persistent crickets and frogs along the creek. Sarah Johnson spent her days watching her nephew with growing unease. Michael had come to live with them 3 years ago after a terrible accident claimed his parents, and she had raised him as her own. Mary Johnson rushed across the muddy yard, her skirts gathered in her fists. Inside the barn, her brother stood motionless, staring at the eastern wall, where strange symbols had been carved into the fresh timber circles, intersecting with jagged lines that resembled no alphabet. They recognized. "The tools are gone," Robert whispered, gesturing to the empty workbench. "Every last one." But it was the smell that disturbed them most, a pungent mixture of wild herbs that Dr. Samuel Brown later identified as the same rare variety found in the Smith's horse feed months earlier. The scent clung to the air, impossible to wash away, a constant reminder of the intrusion. Sarah Johnson found herself watching Michael with renewed vigilance. The boy moved through his chores with the same quiet efficiency as always, but she caught him studying the symbols when he thought no one was looking. His head lit it in what appeared to be recognition. "Did you see anything unusual last night?" she asked him over breakfast, trying to keep her voice casual. Michael shook his head, eyes fixed on his plate. No, Aunt Sarah. Sheriff William Carter investigated, but found no footprints, no evidence of forced entry. It's as if whoever did this appeared and disappeared like smoke, he told the Johnsons, his weathered face betraying his unease. The incident cast a pall over the entire community. At church the following Sunday, neighbors who had once shared pews now sat apart. When Miss Artisan offered Mary a jar of preserved peaches, a gesture that would have once been received with gratitude, Mary hesitated before accepting, wondering if the gift concealed some hidden meaning or threat. Even John Davis, whose own farm had remained untouched since the calf incident, kept his distance from the Johnsons at the general store, eyeing Michael with poorly disguised suspicion. The boy seemed to absorb it all, growing thinner and more withdrawn. Sarah found him one evening standing alone in the yard, staring at the stars with such intensity that she shivered despite the mild evening air. "What are you looking at?" she asked. "The patterns," Michael replied, not looking down. "They're the same everywhere." Sarah didn't ask what he meant. Some questions, she had learned, were better left unasked in a town where kindness had become suspect and laughter a rare, fragile thing. The Missouri countryside of 1866 carried scars deeper than those left by the war. In Sedalia, where fields stretched toward uncertain horizons, the old ways and new fears mingled like mist over the creek beds. Sheriff William Carter found himself caught between these worlds as he rode his horse along the outskirts of town, notebook tucked inside his weathered coat. The Scandinavian families who had settled north of the Johnson farm gathered each evening to sing songs from their homeland. Their melodies drifted across the fields like spirits, words unintelligible but meaning clear. Darkness lurked everywhere, even in this promised land. The sheriff often slowed his mount to listen, wondering if their ancient warnings held answers he couldn't find in his rational investigations. "They say the birds flew backward yesterday," Mrs. Patterson told him when he stopped to water his horse. Her fingers worked nervously at her apron. Old Mrs. Dunham saw it plain as day, crows circling the Johnson place counterclockwise. "It's a sign, Sheriff." Carter nodded politely, though his jaw tightened. Every conversation now twisted toward omens and portents. The creaking of a door hinge became a ghostly warning. A calf born with unusual markings was scrutinized for divine messages. Science and reason, the tools he relied upon, seemed powerless against the tide of superstition. At the general store, he overheard John Davis arguing with the shopkeeper about protection charms. "My grandmother knew these things," Davis insisted, slapping coins on the counter. "Salt across the threshold keeps evil out. I won't have what happened to the Smith's horse happen to my livestock." The doctor was Carter's only ally in maintaining rationality. Samuel Brown had established a small laboratory in his back room, where he meticulously documented each incident, searching for natural explanations. "Mass hysteria," he muttered when the sheriff visited. "I've read accounts from Salem. Once fear takes hold, people see witchcraft in a spilled milk pail." But even the physician's confidence wavered when discussing Michael Johnson. The boy's quiet intensity and uncanny knowledge of local flora had raised questions neither man could answer with certainty. As dusk fell, Carter watched an elderly woman make the sign of the cross when Mary Johnson passed by with a basket of eggs. The sheriff removed his hat, rubbing his forehead wearily. How could he maintain order when the enemy was invisible, perhaps imaginary, perhaps terrifyingly real?